We have some breaking news in our politics lead. Just moments ago, a federal judge temporarily blocked the Biden administration from ending a Trump-era pandemic restriction on the U.S.-Mexico border. It's known as Title 42. It currently allows border authorities to turn migrants back back to Mexico or their home countries because of the public health crisis. The Biden administration planned to end the restrictions on May 23rd. That's a move that drew bipartisan criticism. Also in our politics lead, newly obtained text messages by then Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, shedding new light on what members of Congress were saying and thinking on January 6th and the days after, including staunch Trump supporter Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who texted Mark Meadows about a week after the insurrection, saying, quote, "In our private chat with only members of Congress, several are saying the only way to save our republic is for Trump to call for martial law. I don't know on these things. I just wanted you to tell him, the president, they stole this election. We all know they will destroy our country next. Please tell him to declassify as much as possible so we can go after Biden and anyone else." So that's what Marjorie Taylor Greene said. But Alyssa, let me start with you. This is what she said in a text message. But just last week on Friday, she was asked in court when there's this effort to get her off the ballot because of this legal theory that because she participated in an insurrection, she shouldn't be able to run for office, according to, Civil War era legislation. Anyway, she was asked if she'd ever advocated for martial law. This is what she had to say.
Ms. Greene, did you advocate to President Trump to impose martial law as a way to remain in power?
I don't recall.
So you're not denying you did it, you just don't remember.
I don't remember.
So I guess generally speaking, that's what people say when they did it, but they don't want to admit it.
Right. You would think you would recall something as significant as calling for martial law. But the thing that's notable about the Marjorie Taylor Greene text is January 17th. This is 2 weeks after the insurrection, days before the swearing in of President Biden. And keep in mind, Secretary Esper's out of DOD. It's now Trump's hand-picked defense secretary. And Chairman Milley, if he had been asked, we're invoking martial law, you would have had a full-blown constitutional crisis. The Department of Defense probably would have had every general officer walk out because they would not do this. I don't think we fully appreciate how crazy some of the theories being espoused in those final weeks were.
Yeah. I totally agree. That's what I was most struck by. This is 11 days after January 6th, a violent insurrection in which 5 people died, more than 100 Capitol police officers were injured, and police officers generally are injured. And 3 days before Joe Biden is going to be president. This wasn't, not that it's forgivable, Jake, right? Not that, oh, well, it was December 20th, so it's fine. But I do think it speaks to how deep they had gone down this hole so close to Joe Biden being sworn in. You know, if we all prior to this, I think, said, the peaceful transition of power, at the end of the day, we have that. We had that with Bush Gore. We have that always. We almost didn't have
We didn't have it.
And
we didn't.
Right. We didn't in any meaningful way. You're exactly right. It could have been significantly worse, because to Alyssa's point, it's not that far. We weren't that far away.
3 days away.
This is Marjorie Taylor Greene and other members of Congress sending it to the White House Chief of Staff. This is not just like a conversation on conservative talk radio.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is serious stuff.
And in segment, there were several Republicans in Trump's orbit pleading for Trump to act while the insurrection was happening. Mick Mulvaney, the former acting chief of staff, Mark Meadows, the chief of staff then. Mark, he needs to stop this now. Can I do anything to help? Republican Congressman William Timmons. The president needs to stop this ASAP, writes Priebus, the former chief of staff and RNC chair. Tell them, all caps, tell them to go home. Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., to Meadows. He's got to condemn this shit ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough. Meadows responds, I'm pushing it hard. I agree. Trump Jr. writes back, this is one you go to the mattresses on. They will try to F his entire legacy on this if it gets worse. And yet, quite a number of those individuals still lying about the election, still lying about the insurrection.
And one of the notable messages to me in the moment of the insurrection that you didn't read was from a congressman who told Mark Meadows, this does not help our cause. So you really, and it's also stunning to see too, and the Meadows text kind of laid this out, how quickly these Republican members and these Republican officials turned from, panic and concern and urging the president to call this off to so quickly saying, well, maybe we can explain that this was Antifa. Like, I think that Antifa was involved here, or there were other explanations. I mean, you saw this with Kevin McCarthy, too, who keeps kind of hanging on to his claim that it was actually Democrats who were responsible for the insurrection, when we know from what McCarthy said at the time that he held Trump. He said Trump bared some responsibility. So these text messages are very illuminating in that count. And you see why the January 6th committee wanted to talk to Mark Meadows so badly for their investigation.
Yeah, although he stopped cooperating with the committee after he turned over those texts. But I have to say, these texts are very helpful to the committee.
Yeah, they're very helpful, and they give us a lot of information about the fact of what people were thinking in real time, which is very contrary to what they said in public, which just reiterates the point that the GOP is not leading, they're following. What they do is they have their feelings about things, and then they find out, oh, the MAGA people want us to do something different, so we'll do that and we'll pretend like we never thought anything else. But I think the more important thing here for me is the fact that they obviously recognize that Donald Trump had the ability to stop this.
Yeah.
And that's the dereliction of duty. And so there's no other way to read these texts than them clearly saying there's one person who can stop this right now, and it's Donald Trump, and Donald Trump never did that.
And Alyssa, take a look at this, because David Perdue, former senator, formerly respected CEO, is now challenging the incumbent Republican governor, Brian Kemp, in Georgia. Georgia, one of these places where Donald Trump falsely claimed a whole bunch of fraud that did not exist, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, Jared Kushner in these texts forwards a story showing how, like, one of these allegations, conspiracy theories, was just nonsense. Anyway, here's David Perdue in a debate.
Let me be very clear tonight. The election in 2020 was rigged and stolen. Rising gas prices, unbelievable inflation, the brink of war. All that started right here in Georgia when our governor caved and allowed radical Democrats to steal our election.
Does he believe that?
I don't think so. I've spent a decent amount of time with David Perdue. He knows better. People around him do. And by the way, he lost that race because he echoed election fraud claims. I was advising the Georgia Senate runoffs. People weren't turning out because everyone was saying, hey, your vote doesn't count. It's all rigged. So it's just the fact that was his opening statement, by the way. This wasn't like a one-off point in the debate. He is running on it was stolen and Governor Kemp should not be governor for upholding the Democratic election. And
I want to bring you in because you pointed something out to me that I had completely forgotten. So Jamie Gangel and I in December reported that there was this text that the committee thought Rick Perry wrote, basically pushing this crazy theory about not recognizing electors. And we reached out to Rick. It was traced to Rick Perry's phone. We reached out to his office. His spokesman denied it. And then today,
in these trove of texts, not only was it traced to Rick Perry's phone, as you reported, he signed the text Rick Perry. So either someone got his phone, and I mean, it strange credulity to think that this is not. It was right then. It's right now. The idea that you would lie about this, like we've seen with Kevin McCarthy too. Just bald-faced lying is now okay, I guess.
Yeah, McCarthy lying again today about his denial of that story.
Right. And it's constant. And unfortunately, it's not a crime to lie to the press. But I think politicians should remember, everyone should remember that when you're lying to the press, you're lying to the public.
All right. Thanks, one and all. Breaking news in our politics lead, CNN has exclusively obtained more than 2,000 text messages sent and received by then Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, including exchanges with Trump family members such as Ivanka and Don Jr., and more than 40 current and former Republican officials from Election Day 2020 until President Biden's inauguration in January 2021. Let's get right to CNN special correspondent Jamie Gangel, one of the team that broke this incredible story. And Jamie, some of these messages have never been seen before. Give us a sense of the scope of what you and your fellow reporters have obtained.
So most of them have never been seen before. We obtained all 2,319 text messages that Mark Meadows voluntarily turned over to the committee. The texts provide the most revealing picture yet about what was going on behind the scenes, from Trump family members, as you mentioned, Ivanka Trump, to campaign officials like Jason Miller, to Republican members of Congress, to activists, to people like Sidney Powell, who are fighting the case. It's also interesting because let's just go through some of the 40 members, more than 40 members of Congress. You have Ted Cruz, you have Mo Brooks, you have Jim Jordan, and you have Marjorie Taylor Greene. So you really see a spectrum, and this is from Election Day to January 20th. Big picture, 30,000 feet, what do you see? This is not normal. Mark Meadows is not acting as a White House chief of staff. He's acting as a campaign manager. He is never pushing back on Donald Trump from what we've seen in these logs about January 6th.
One of the most alarming things that we've heard about the plans back then, Michael Flynn, the former general, and others were talking about declaring martial law, seizing control of voting stations in various battleground states. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, she testified on Friday. She was asked if she remembered invoking or advocating for Trump to invoke martial law. She said she didn't remember. Anything in the text about that?
So let's prompt her memory. 3 texts. Interesting. January 6th, she's alarmed. She is one of the first members of Congress, according to these texts, to actually reach out to Meadows. And she says, quote, Mark, I was just told there is an active shooter on the first floor of the Capitol. Please tell the president to calm people. This isn't the way to solve anything. Now, she is one of Trump's most ardent supporters, and she's saying, stop it. January 7th, her tone changes, and the next day, she's not so scared, and she's apologetic. And she texts Meadows, and she says, quote, I'm sorry, nothing worked. That's about stopping the process.
Stopping the counting of the vote of the American people.
She was sorry they couldn't get that done. On January 17th, this is the critical text. She is still looking for a way to keep Trump in power. Quote, in our private chat with only members, several are saying the only way to save our republic is for Trump to call for martial, she doesn't know how to spell it, law. I don't know on those things. I just wanted you to tell him they stole this election. We all know they will destroy our country next. Please tell him to declassify as much as possible so we can go after Biden and anything else. 3 days before the inauguration, she is trying to encourage the White House to invoke martial law.
It's terrifying. You also have messages coming into Meadows from people like Donald Trump Jr.
Right. So some of these things we've seen, but one of the starkest things is that on January 6th, all of his staunchest allies are reaching out to Meadows saying, please get the president to stop. And we know he doesn't. Mick Mulvaney, former acting chief of staff. Mark, he needs to stop this. Can I do anything to help? Representative William Timmons, the president needs to stop this ASAP. Reince Priebus, former chief of staff. All capital letters, tell them to go home, 3 exclamation points. And now we get to his son, Donald Trump Jr. He's got to condemn this. You can read it ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough. Meadows says, I'm pushing it hard. I agree. And then this is brand new. Donald Trump Jr. says, this is one you go to the mattresses on. They will try to F his entire legacy on this if it gets worse.
So all of these allies who subsequently have acted as though this is not a big deal, or this was Antifa, or everybody's making too big a deal of it, all of them behind the scenes saying not only that they know it's a big deal, but they all believe President Trump could stop it.
In real time, in black and white, and that goes to people like Jared Kushner, who on December 5th sends a text message to Meadows with a link to a news article that says, video from Georgia does not show suitcases filled with ballots pulled from under the table. He gets that this isn't real, and he's telling Meadows that. Then on January 13th, Jason Miller, campaign spokesman, says in a group text to Meadows and Kushner, quote, I tried to walk the president through this earlier, but he won't have any of it. Here's the interesting part. 2/3 of the MAGA base wants us to move on. They all knew, Jake, to your point, but they either weren't telling Trump, but they certainly were not telling the public and their followers. Just for context, Meadows' replies, they tend to be very short. As far as the logs are concerned, sometimes it looks as if he does not reply at all. We don't know if that's because things were deleted or withheld for privilege.
It's very disturbing, but amazing reporting. Jamie Gengel, thank you so much. Appreciate it. The problem goes well beyond those tech. Back in our politics lead across the country, Republican candidates are campaigning on former President Donald Trump's big lie about the 2020 election. In Michigan, the state Republican Party just formally endorsed two candidates known for spreading misinformation about the 2020 election, including the woman who, if elected, would supervise elections in the state. And as CNN's Sarah Murray reports for us now, Michigan is sadly far from alone.
The presidential election was rigged and stolen.
The big lie is still the big motivator for many Republican voters.
We're insurrectionists, we're traitors, big lie proponents for asking questions.
The 2022 Michigan State Convention will come to order.
In Michigan, Republicans this weekend overwhelmingly endorsed Christina Caramo, who spread conspiracies about the 2020 election and the January 6th insurrection, to be their nominee for Secretary of State, the state's top election official.
Thank you.
Walloping other candidates with election experience, Caramo is on track to take on the Democratic incumbent this fall.
Guess what, Jocelyn Benson? I am your worst nightmare.
In the run-up to the midterms, national Republicans say they're focused on the economy, inflation, and crime. But in Republican primaries, the magic words are Donald Trump. And the litmus test is denying the results of the 2020 presidential election without any evidence of widespread fraud.
Christina Caramo. She is a fearless champion for election integrity.
In Colorado, State Representative Ron Hanks, an election denier running for U.S. Senate with an ad featuring footage from the January 6th insurrection, not on the Republican primary ballot from conservatives at the GOP Assembly. Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters, who faces criminal charges for her alleged role in an election security breach, charges she calls politically motivated, is running for Colorado Secretary of State.
It's a pleasure to be here to sound the alarm. I'm Tina Peters.
And also won Republicans' backing for top billing on the GOP ballot. In Arizona, home of the infamous Cyber Ninjas review, GOP Senate hopeful and sitting Attorney General Mark Brnovich is getting hammered on the airwaves by other Republicans for his role in certifying the state's 2020 election results.
Mark Brnovich says President Trump is wrong on voter fraud? Really?
In Georgia,
Brian Kemp sold us out and allowed radicals to steal the election.
David Perdue is going after Governor Brian Kemp for certifying the election in 2020 as the two face off in the GOP gubernatorial primary. Putting up election deniers in November could prove risky for the GOP.
The risk is losing.
Republican strategist Jason Cable-Rowe says even with the challenging environment for Democrats, Republicans still need to strike a broader appeal.
Relitigating the 2020 election is popular with Republican voters. It's not popular with non-Republican voters. The idea that we can win without independents and some, conservative swing Democrats coming our way is ignoring the reality of Michigan politics.
Over at the GOP endorsement conventions, appearances from election deniers like Mike Lindell and Rudy Giuliani, as Republicans convene for more than 10 hours. After 2 rounds of voting,
District 9,
2 hand recounts,
we know what the problem is,
and a ballot snafu that paused voting for an hour,
do not resume voting. All voting is paused.
And left Republicans grumbling over election integrity, the Trump-backed candidates cleaned up.
Support the America First ticket. Support your President Donald Trump.
With Matt DePerno securing the party's support for Attorney General after months of trying to revive an unsuccessful election lawsuit and spreading lies about 2020.
We proved how corruptible our system is, and we proved how fraud occurred in this state.
Now, it's clear that the Republican delegates that met over the weekend were energized by all this misinformation about 2020. But when I tried to ask Christina Caramo and Matt DePerno how they were going to appeal to a broader base of voters here in Michigan, they refused to answer the questions. Jake.
Sarah Murray, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Coming up, what Republicans had to say today. And we're back with our world lead in a show of solidarity from the United States. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin traveled to the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky and other key Ukrainian leaders. After that meeting, Blinken declaring that Ukraine will be around, quote, a lot longer than Vladimir Putin, unquote. Joining us live to discuss, Democratic Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, who serves as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us. So Secretary of State Blinken is going to testify before your committee tomorrow. What immediate questions do you have for him following his trip to Ukraine?
Well, Jay, good to be with you. I want to hear what he heard from President Zelensky. I want to hear specifically what is the type of assistance that President Zelensky is looking for. What is our ability to provide that? What is the success of the overwhelming lethal equipment that we provided the Ukrainians, and how are they using that? So I want to get a clear picture from the State Department about what has happened in terms of that which we provided, what is the plan for that which we will provide, so that the Ukrainians can continue to successfully fight for their country and defeat the Russians at the end of the day. So while tomorrow's hearing is a bigger hearing, it's about the budget, but obviously this is the issue of the moment, and I'm sure there'll be many questions along those lines.
A senior State Department official tells CNN that Secretary Blinken said that American diplomats are going to start to return to Kyiv this week. I believe Kyiv, definitely Ukraine. Are you concerned about their safety?
I'm always concerned about our diplomats abroad and their safety anywhere in the world. This is obviously a country that is at war, but we have had diplomats in countries at war before. So I'm sure that the Secretary has been working through diplomatic security to make sure that, to the extent that diplomats are returning, they are returning in a way that they can be helpful in our bilateral relationships with Ukraine, be a source of direct communications with the Zelensky government, but do it in a way in which they're safe and secure. I'm also very glad to hear that the administration has named someone to be a career person, the ambassador to Ukraine. I look forward to reviewing her file and having her before the committee as soon as possible.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says America wants to see Russia, quote, weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine, unquote. What will it take to weaken Russia that much?
Well, I think as I understood the Secretary Austin's statement, it's basically about saying not having Russia have the wherewithal to continue to attack Ukraine in the way that it's had, and not to bring that belligerence to another country. You've seen some of the suggestions by some of the Russian high establishment in terms of the military about talking about Transnistria and other targets to come. And so it's a combination of really continuing to inflict enormous pain on the Russian military, which the Ukrainians have courageously done with the use of our weaponry. And secondly, to continue to tighten the economic noose around Putin's neck and to create unrest in Russia because of the economic consequences that the Russian people are facing as a result of Putin's decision to unjustly invade Ukraine and violate the international order. That has to be a continuum. Every day, we are looking at different ways in which we can create those economic pressures on Russia and on Putin, but at the same time, create enormous consequences. You know, and I think Russian mothers are beginning to ask, where's my son? And that will continue to be a real problem for Vladimir Putin.
You talk about economic pressure. Last year, the European Union paid Russia almost $300 million every single day for energy, oil, gold, natural gas. Ukrainian officials, when I was in Ukraine a couple weeks ago, they told me this is unacceptable, that Germany and other European countries need to stop their funding Putin's war, even if they take an economic hit. These European countries, they need to do this. Do you agree? Does the U.S. need to take more of a leadership role in helping Germany and other European countries to end their energy dependence on Russia as soon as possible?
Well, certainly ending the energy dependence on Russia for not just Germany, but Europe is one of the most important things we can do. And we have been engaged. We've been engaged with the Qataris and others to provide liquefied natural gas to Germany and other countries. We are looking at other sources of energy to help diversify the European dependency that they've had on Russia. But let's be very honest. You just can't turn the switch overnight. If it could be done, and if there were other sources that could replace it, it's not just an economic hit. It's what that energy supplies to the people in those countries, to the businesses in those countries, to the economy of those countries that are helping to fuel the supplies necessary for Ukraine to fight against Russia. So yes, we want to see it end yesterday, but by the same token, we have to deal with the realities of how do we create the alternatives. And what I hope and what I know will happen, this is why Putin has made one of the most strategic blunders of his life, is that Europe wants to diversify away from Russia. Before, they were happy and content to have Russia as their gas station. That's not the case anymore. And that's going to have long-term consequences for Russia. The quicker we can do it and the quicker we can help Europe be able to do it, it's going to take some difficult choices. Do we want to turn to some of our Gulf partners, which we have some strained relationships with, and say, you know, crank up the output? They'll probably do that, but they'll probably have things that they are concerned about in return. That's one of the policy decisions that's going to have to be made.